Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast. This is your host, Molly. And in this episode, we are going to be doing something really, really special. We're going to have our very first CARS reading skills workshop with our very own Jack Westin himself. Hi, Jack. So excited to have you.
Hey Molly, so excited to be here. I've been pumped to do this with you, so really excited.
Yeah. So, for everybody, basically what we're going to be doing in this episode and in future episodes, right, ideally every week, we're going to be going through one of our CARS daily passages, and it'll be posted on the day that the episode is posted. So, what we'll be doing is walking through the passage itself, really analyzing the material that's presented in that passage, and getting you guys all the insight that you need to feel confident when you approach the questions on your own. So we'll be going through and highlighting what the author really means when they write each sentence and each paragraph and making sure that we're pulling out of it everything that we could possibly need to when the questions come around.
Yeah, I think that the most important part about a CARS passage is understanding what you're reading. The reading comprehension side is a struggle for students, and that's not because they can't do it. It's just simply it's not like one of those things that they do often, right? As
Yeah.
most meds are science majors and they don't read all day every day. And so if you can get into the habit of doing one daily passage, and understanding it really well, it's going to make your life easier when you approach the exams and the actual test.
Yeah, I feel like for a lot of us, especially given that CARS is so distant from the topics that we learn about daily, right? You're getting passages on history and archaeology and art and dance and all these things that we never engage with, I think, as pre-meds. It creates this overwhelming fear and anxiety. And part of getting better at CARS is really just accepting that, yeah, this isn't something that I read every day. But that doesn't mean that I can't read it effectively using the same strategies as I would read any other passage. So that's something that we hope to impart on you guys in a podcast like this, right? The same strategies can be used for any kind of passage. And I think that is really a core tenet of our course philosophy, right? So super excited to do this. And again, you guys, if you want more from our CARS strategies. We do free sessions every single week. Right now, actually, Jack is teaching them. So definitely come join. We hold them every single week, and you can get even more insight into how we do CARS here.
Awesome. Let's get started.
All right. So, the first passage that we'll be doing, right, for our very first episode is the passage from today, April 7th. It's a Cars Daily passage called Hunting Animals. Um, so, I say we just hop right in. What do you think, Jack?
Yeah, so I think, just to explain the way we're going to approach it, we're going to go line by line. And we want to make sure we understand exactly what's being said. And I want everyone to kind of see how I would myself or Molly would read it, right? And so like I want to go over it and see, okay, what is it saying? What should I know from this? Is this important? Is this not important? And you'll notice there are going to be themes, there are going to be arguments, ideas. We're going to be very precise about it. And when you understand what you're reading, the questions are going to be much easier for you. So when you do the questions on your own, after reading this passage, I think you're going to agree, okay, yeah, this makes way more sense now, right? So I'm really excited to see how our students do and the feedback that we receive in our live sessions. So yeah, let's go ahead. Let's do
Love
it.
it. Yeah. And students, by the way, if you want to get the most out of a podcast like this, highly recommend you check out the passage, maybe give it a read before we sit down so you could see what you pull out of it. One of the things that is incredibly valuable about a resource like this is you get to compare your reasoning against Jack's reasoning, right? Or my reasoning. You get a lot more context with what you're doing and maybe how we could be doing things differently or how we can improve our reading comprehension. So, the best, most ideal situation, right? Give it a read first. evaluate what do I think is important, and then compare it to what we're discussing here so that you can see if there are any ways that you'd want to improve. Maybe you're doing it perfectly, but you'll have a little bit more context to learn and grow, which of course is everybody's ultimate goal.
That's a great point. We do link the this passage onto the captions, right, for the
Yes.
podcast. So you'll be able to click on that, actually, read it on your own, and then listen to us read it with you and see how you that compares. That's a great idea. This passage, I'd like to give like, a quick kind of summary of what we're going to do today. I think
Hmm.
the beauty of this passage is sometimes I think the theme is unexpected, right? Like sometimes you may think an author is saying one thing, but then ends up saying a totally different thing, right? And
Yes.
so don't ever assume you know what the author is thinking or assume what society would expect, right? And use that as your reference point because every author is going to be different. Their opinions are going to be different. And we just need to really pay attention to what they want, not what we think they want or what society wants for them.
I love that. Yeah. And I think even for this passage, which of course we'll get into in a moment, I think some of our listeners and some of the readers of this passage may have their own thoughts and feelings about this topic. So
Right.
it's also an exercise in separating yourself from what is being discussed. Ultimately, and I say this with all the love in my heart, when it comes to cars, you don't matter, right? I don't matter. The only person that matters when you're reading a Cars passage is the author, right? And the author's thoughts, feelings, perspectives, all that good stuff, right? So we need to focus on clearing our minds, right, of all of our history, thoughts, feelings, opinions, and interacting with just what the author is telling us. So I think this passage also gives a nice exercise in distancing yourself from the topic, even if it is one that you do have opinions about, right? And sometimes those opinions can sway the way that we read. So, yeah, I think this is a great passage to start us off.
Awesome.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, let's go ahead and hop in. We'll start, of course, with our very first sentence of our passage. And this reads, two different relationships with animals, one in hunting and the other in companionship, can be experienced by one person. So right out of the gate, I would say that we have an idea, an argument being presented by the author, right? What we're saying is you can have, again, two different relationships with an animal, right? Not just this is my pet, not just this is food. You can have different relationships um, with one person exclusively.
Yeah, that's great. So the way I would visualize this is okay, we have one person, but then they can treat animals. It doesn't say which kind of animals, right?
Mhm.
But animals in different ways. One is hunting, so when you kill an animal and eat it, and
Mhm.
the other one is companionship, which is like being a pet, something that you help that's kind of friendly, kind of in your life. And so we have different relationships with animals, and specifically a hunting one and a companionship one. So great. The first sentence is always going to be really important because it sets the theme, it sets the context for what we're talking about. I bet you, right? If I didn't know anything about this passage, by reading this first sentence, I know we're talking about animals. I know we're
Mhm.
talking about people, right?
Mhm.
People in relation to animals, right? So that builds the context. And of course, we're talking about hunting and companionship, which again, I bet you they're going to expand on these things, these ideas, these topics more and more as we read. So, first sentence, very important of the very first paragraph. Read it really carefully. Allow yourself to build that context.
I love that. Yeah, and it is. I think this first sentence is very easy to visualize, right? So to kind of see it in your mind's eye, you can imagine a person, petting a companion animal. You can imagine someone, shooting a bow at another animal, right? Like there are different dynamics between humans and animals.
Perfect.
I love that. Okay, let's look at our next sentence. So it says many farmers, for example, shoot rabbits as vermin, catch fish for sport, and enjoy the companionship of dogs. So this sentence, I mean, it says, for example, and it certainly is giving us examples of different types of relationships between animals and humans. So you're totally right, Jack, right? We definitely are going to continue to expand on and elaborate on this idea of human animal relationships.
Right. And so a couple things to note here. It's building on the context. So it's this sentence should be easier for you to understand because
Hmm.
you invested time to really understand the first sentence, right? Many farmers shoot rabbits. Okay, that's hunting, right?
Hmm.
Catch fish, that's hunting again. Enjoy companionship of dogs. That's the companionship, right? And it's referring to different animals, rabbits, fish, dogs. So we have humans have different relationships with animals, hunting and companionship, right? Now, it doesn't say, it says specifically two different relationships. So we are bound to hunting and companionship so far. It doesn't say other kinds of relationships, right? Just two specifically. Is this really an example? Right? If you're in one of our programs, our self-study program or our online live online program, or our tutoring program, you know that this is not actually an example, right? Because
Hmm.
an example for us is something that's really well defined and it's very specific. This is too general. This is more of a list than an
Yeah.
example, even though it says, for example, right? The
Mhm.
MCAT will never really use these quote unquote examples as examples that they'll ask about, right? It's not vivid enough. It's not specific enough, but it's still helpful for us to read to understand what's going on. Now, I know a lot of students will read shoot rabbits as vermin and they'll go, wait a second, what is vermin? I don't know what that means. It doesn't matter. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. You know they're shooting rabbits. That's hunting, right?
Yeah.
So if you're stuck on that word and you're scratching your head and you're panicking, you're missing out on what MCAT cars is about. It's about reading for the big ideas. It's about understanding the point the author's trying to make. You're not going to understand every word. That's okay. Keep going. But vermin kind of means like some nuisance, some annoying thing. You shoot them because they're annoying, right? And so that's the way they're approaching vermin. Catch fish for sport. That's their way of providing it in terms of it's a sport, it's fun, it's hunting, right? And so yeah, so that again, it's the same thing, same idea, but it's just expanding on it.
Love that. Yeah. And it's almost like if you were reading really fast in that first sentence, which of course is something that we always, suggest against. Definitely, especially the first sentence, read it nice and slow. But even if you were feeling nervous, you read that quickly. When you read the second sentence, you're like, oh, wait, this is exactly what I just read. Like, okay, maybe the author really did care about that. All right, cool. We get these two relationships, hunting, companionship, right? And that's why the author puts it in there, is to provide support for whatever argument they just had. They want you to remember. So I love that, the author chose to do that here, giving us a nice little list to visualize what they're talking about.
Right.
The next sentence kind of adds a new layer of this. So it says, even one species can be both game and companion to a person. So I like this kind of new layer. We've talked about how we can hunt animals or animals can be our companions. And we've given this kind of list of different scenarios that we hunt rabbits, right? We catch fish or we have a dog as a companion. But now we're saying one animal or one species can be both at the same time to a person, which is kind of interesting.
Right. So they're making this more specific. They're not just saying, "Oh, we have different relationships with different animals." We're not just saying, "Oh, we can hunt one and then, play with another, right? And be a companion for another." It's saying there can be one species, one animal, right, that we can do both with. We can shoot, you can hunt them, or you can also, have them as your companion, as your pet, right? And so,
Mhm.
great, let's keep going.
Cool. So it says, I met a boy who accompanies his father rabbit shooting and keeps pet rabbits. So now we're giving a specific individual who illustrates this, right? You shoot rabbits, but you also keep rabbits as pets. Again, the author is adding support to that statement, right? Giving a situation that illustrates that you can have a pet and basically hunt that same animal that you keep as your pet.
Exactly, a rabbit, right? You're doing both with it. So this is an example because it's more specific. It's a specific time where, this author saw a boy. Now, I would love for the author to actually mention the boy's name, the father,
Mhm.
but it's enough for us to visualize a specific instance in time where something happened, and that's what typically an example looks like on the MCAT car section. Go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah. And we even see another one. So, another boy who goes fishing and barbecues fish at the riverside keeps goldfish at home. So, we get a second individual, a second boy who illustrates this same principle of one species being both a companion and, a hunted animal.
Isn't that weird to think about? Like we hunt a rabbit, but then we also have rabbits as pets. We fish, we fish the fish, but then we also have goldfish at home.
Yeah.
Like it's an interesting point. Like I've never really thought of it that way, right? But
Yeah.
like we can use one animal, or we use one animal as hunting game and also as a companion, right?
Hmm.
That's the idea that the author really wants us to know. Great.
Yeah. And that's why it's so powerful that the author is including situations like this that illustrate their argument, because it's easy to read that one species could be both game and companion to a person and just say, yeah, sure, whatever. But they're really slowing it down for you and making you think and realize, wait, you're right. That is true. And that's kind of odd, right? Which is why authors use support like that. That's the point of that. It's easy to
Right.
read through those sentences and say, I don't care, but they're using it to highlight the importance of what they've said previously. So, okay, so our next sentence says they make a clear distinction between pets, which are reared to be human companions, and wild species, which they define as game. So the individual is kind of setting expectations for these animals, kind of finding that difference between a pet, a companion, versus wild species as game.
Right. So the author is suggesting that humans can actually separate the two in one animal, right? We can look at the same animal as a pet, but we can also see the same animal as game, right? So the author is making this conclusion or this idea that, hey, we actually know what we're doing. We know that when we hunt the same animal, right? A rabbit. We know when we make it a pet. We're clearly aware of this. Right. Okay.
Cool. So, moreover, professional pest controllers, such as gamekeepers and deer stalkers, often come to know wild animals as individuals and develop some attachment to them. So, we get a semicolon here to pause and reflect. Okay, we've got this pest controller that's learning that basically they have an attachment to what they're supposed to hunt. I'm reading that and thinking, wait a minute, I thought we were able to distinguish this. But of course, then it continues and it says, yet it is vital to their livelihood that they control these species of animals. So it kind of calls back to we need to distinguish between pets that we're meant to protect and cherish versus game, right, that we're supposed to hunt.
Great. Yeah. And there isn't really much I can add to this other than, the author is just expanding on this with support. Now, is this an example? Not really. It's not vivid enough. It's not specific instance. It's more generalized. And so it's more of like an elaboration supporting what we've already discussed, th that we can make this distinction of this relationship with one animal.
Yeah. Well, Jack, how would you, to a student that's coming out of this first paragraph, right? How would you say, like, what would you say that they should be taking with them for the next one? If you had to kind of nutshell what we learned here.
Something that the authors do often is they start with a more general idea. So the general idea they'll start with is, okay, there's two different relationships, right? And they're not making it clear, that it's one animal yet. And they're not making it clear that this relationship, the human can distinguish well, right? And so it's sort of like a funnel, right? The top of the funnel is bigger, is wider, and as you read the paragraph, it becomes more and more specific to what the author really cares about, right? And so as I'm reading this, I'm always looking for that specificity. What is the author really trying to get at? And it's not always the case that the author is going to go into this kind of funnel approach, but I've noticed that the author really cares about one thing, which is that humans have two relationships with the animal, and it can be the same animal, and they know the difference They know the difference. They can distinguish the two. And so that's what I'm going to take away from this. And, I had to read the whole paragraph to get that. I can't just read the first sentence or the last sentence. I have to understand how the author kind of presented these ideas to get to that idea, to get to that final staged, mature idea, right? That was pretty much pointed out at the very end.
Sweet. So let's see how the author builds on this point when we move into our second paragraph. So this paragraph begins public debates over cruelty to animals, however, do not reflect such duality and ambiguity in the human animal relationship. Okay, so now we're kind of introducing a new, situation. When we talk about animal cruelty, we lose this distinction that we've defined in paragraph 1, pets versus game.
Yeah, so this is a little harder to read, right? It's not, it seems weird. Now we're going into cruelty. So public debates over cruelty. So we're talking about how people feel about animals and their suffering and their, how they may be cruel to animals. But it's basically saying, okay, there might be some sort of challenge. It does not reflect this duality. Duality meaning, this combination of being a companion, having a companion as a pet, and hunting the pet, right? And so it's basically suggesting that there's public debate over this. Maybe this is not correct. Maybe this is not how everyone feels about this, right? And cruelty has something to do with it. We don't know exactly what. It's again the top of the funnel, right? It's very wide. It's general, and you should expect the author to become more and more specific about what they really care about as we read this paragraph.
Love that. Yeah. Okay, so let's keep reading. And we'll see if it builds, right? So because the population at large does not experience hunting, the image of animals held by most people is that of companions. So it kind of further explains this. It's because we don't see the other side of it. We expect every animal human relationship to be a companion because we don't experience hunting. We don't see that side of the relationship.
That's a great point. Did the author say that directly that we don't see hunting? Like, how did you get that because we don't see hunting, like I feel like you're trying to get at something that hasn't been said yet, but we can kind of sense what the author is trying to suggest.
Yeah, it seems like they might be moving in that direction with the phrasing, but you're right. We want to be careful about assumptions.
Right. So far, all the author said is that we can be cruel to animals, right? There's some public debate over cruelty to animals, and that this duality is challenged. We don't know exactly what that exact what the author is trying to get at with that, but it seems like there is a problem, right? I can sense a problem. And the author is now making a very bold claim, right? A very bold idea that because the population doesn't experience hunting specifically, we don't know what about hunting exactly. Most people just look at the animal as a companion, and so they don't see hunting. And we can probably assume that because they don't see or experience hunting, they find that to be cruel, right? And they don't agree that you can hunt and have an animal as your companion, right? And so it's sort of going in that direction, right? We can sense that. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so an example can be seen in the debate over suffering of hunted animals, where those who oppose hunting do so because they think of the animals as pets. So, kind of elaborating and kind of shedding light on the idea that just came before.
Perfect, perfect. So the rule of thumb is if the first sentence of this paragraph didn't make sense to you, don't panic. Okay, it becomes clearer and clearer as you keep reading. As long as you paid attention and you were careful, have confidence. Keep going because the rest of the paragraph will clear it up. And it did. It made it very clear about how, because they don't hunt, they see the animal suffering, right? And they see it as more of a pet. They just focus on the pet side, right? And so what do you think is the overall summary of this paragraph, Molly? What would you say?
So it sounds like I mean, you kind of just summed it up, right? When we don't experience hunting in the way that they're describing, we automatically see animals as pets. And that leads us to think that this is cruel, right? So
Perfect.
when we see animals as pets only, that's when we start to see cruelty in hunting.
Great, great, awesome. And these are all opinions because maybe that's not the reason why people don't like hunting, right? It's maybe they oppose hunting for other reasons other than us thinking of animals as pets, right? We don't know.
Mhm.
But this is the author's point is, well, we probably don't like hunting or humans oppose hunting to some extent because they focus on it being a pet, right? But
Mhm.
okay, let's keep going.
Cool. Well, let's look at paragraph number 3. It says the most emphasized point of anti hunting campaigns is that hunting is cruel because it inflicts suffering on chased animals. So this feels, similar to what came before, but now we're saying it's cruel because of the suffering that these animals who are being chased are experiencing. It's kind of getting a little bit more specific, at least slightly from what came before.
Right. This is not, we're not talking about animals as pets and that's why they don't like hunting. They're being more specific and giving another point about why people might oppose hunting. It's cruel. The animal suffers, right? So
Mhm.
this is sort of different, right?
Mhm.
And you should expect that. Every paragraph will have some different opinions, typically, right? Sometimes we'll talk about the main idea, those ideas will repeat, right? And that's what makes it a main idea. But let's go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so a recent campaign for prohibition of stag hunting uses a result of scientific research that chasing causes the deer detrimental stress. So, again, kind of just building on the point that we just made. Being chased is stressful for the animal.
Right. Sounds good.
All right, as for fox hunting, the League Against Cruel Sports argues as follows. And we have a direct quote here. The distress suffered by a prey species must be considerable when pursued by a predator, but the trauma must be far greater for a fox, not naturally adapted to endure long periods of pursuit. So we're kind of saying the fox is not used to being chased, right? If we chase a prey animal, right, that's normal. They're used to that biologically, but a fox is not used to being chased around, right? The fox is usually the predator, and maybe that's some element of this cruelty, according to the League Against Cruel Sports.
Sounds good. Yeah. So basically the theme here is some animals are, they suffer because they're not used to the suffering or right or they're cruel to the animals that are not used to this kind of this, being the game, being the prey. And so it's sort of just expanding on what we've already kind of said, which is hunting is cruel because it causes suffering. Okay.
Yes. And the next sentence kind of continues that, right? It says the real, and this is a continuation of this quote, by the way, the real cruelty of fox hunting lies in the exhaustion, terror, and trauma inflicted on the victim. So we kind of have the same idea being repeated, but now we're using words that are rich with tone. We're not just saying it's cruel and they're suffering. We're getting you a very vivid image here. They're exhausted, they're terrified, and they're traumatized. This trauma is being inflicted on them, and they're victims, right? All of those words that the authors chose, right? They get you very invested in the story, right? Which is a way that they can illustrate their point.
Right, right. And who's saying this? Is this the author saying this or is this someone else?
Yeah, this is the League Against Cruel Sports that is being quoted by the author.
Right. And so we have to make that distinction. It's really important that we know, yes, although the author presented this in their passage, this is not necessarily their point. Their point, they're bringing it up. Now, it could be their point, right? Usually you bring up stuff because you agree with it. But for Carr's passages, you should always expect there to be a theme, a duality, right? And I'm using the word from the passage. There's always going to be this competing theme. One argument says one thing, one argument says another thing, and they compete with each other. And so this is common in Carr's passages where we're constantly looking for arguments that conflict, and we need to figure out, okay, which side is the author on? Is there a side the author's on, right? And so if you had to guess, Molly, is there a way that we could figure out whether or not the author is for hunting animals or is against hunting animals, if you had to guess?
That's a great question, right? Because ultimately, we started off saying we have these two different ways to view animals, and we can distinguish between them, right? If we consider the arguments that have been presented in the earlier paragraphs, right? And then we bring up this perspective of animal cruelty, it doesn't really feel like the author has picked a side yet. If I had
Exactly.
to guess at tone, it seems like the author is pretty neutral so far as what we've seen, just explaining these are the different perspectives that are out there on how human animal relationships can be characterized.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just because we're talking about cruelty and suffering doesn't mean the author is upset or negative. The author is just presenting ideas and hasn't necessarily used any kind of word to suggest that they're extreme in one side over the other, right? The
Mhm.
author is just presenting these ideas. The first paragraph presenting that there's a distinction between hunting and companionship for one animal, right? Second paragraph that basically people that um, don't hunt them see them more as pets, and that's why they would oppose hunting, right?
Mhm.
Third paragraph is going more specifically into discussing the cruelty and the suffering of these animals when you hunt them, right? But
Mhm.
we don't know what the author's point is yet, and we have to, that's our job. Our job is to figure out, okay, what is the author's main argument? What is the author's point after reading this? What should I take away as the message that they really want me to know and keep in mind going over, for the rest of my life, right? And so
Mhm.
it's not clear.
Yeah. Maybe we could come back to that question at the end, see if we
Yeah.
learn any more, because we've got the rest of this paragraph and two more. So let's finish up this quote from the League Against Cruel Sports. There's one more sentence in it. It says, "How would we like it if our family dog was chased until it passed out and then torn apart limb from limb?" End quote. Oh my gosh, reading this sentence, right? It's very clear that the League Against Cruel Sports views this hunting practice of chasing these animals as cruel, like the language, the tone that they're using, the example that they just presented, right, in air quotes, right, the situation that they presented is so emotionally charged. As someone with two dogs, I'm reading this and thinking, oh my gosh, what would I think if that happened? That's terrible, right? It's very emotional language. Again, it's maybe not the author's words. It is this League Against Cruel Sports, but they're using very tone heavy language here to really put us in the perspective of a chased animal. And it works. It's an effective, persuasive writing technique,
Yeah,
I
I was
think.
gonna say that. Yeah, because it helps you visualize it as a pet, right? That is being hunted and that sounds really, really sad, right? And like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if I read that, I'm like, oh wow, okay, maybe that's a good point. Like, I don't want my dog to be hunted, in a
Mm-hmm.
way.
Convincing.
Convincing, yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we have one last sentence, and it says the final analogy to the family dog meant to elicit sympathy shows how they conflate hunting and pet ownership. So it's kind of tying back to an earlier idea. And like you mentioned, Jack, maybe a student sees conflate and maybe they aren't sure what that means. But we know that the League Against Cruel Sports is basically painting these animals as pets, and we know that they just made that analogy. So it sounds like, based on context, when they say this shows how they conflate hunting and pet ownership, they're showing that they get them mixed up, right? Or they see hunted animals as pets. So again, context clues can help here if you see conflate and you're a little nervous about it, right? We're tying back to this earlier idea that was in the previous paragraph.
I love that. Yeah. So the strategy around cars, and if you're in one of our programs, again, you're going to notice this quite often for cars passages, is the arguments, the ideas that the author cares about repeat over and over.
Mhm.
So even if you didn't catch this final sentence, which I think you should have, right? You would have noticed that there's some sort of mix up. You don't need to know what the word conflate means to know
Mhm.
that the author is trying to say, basically they combine or they mix up hunting and pet ownership. But we can probably now, off just reading that sentence, understand what the main idea is, right?
Mhm.
Which is that essentially we do make a distinction between hunting and animal and hunting and companionship. But in some cases, those who oppose hunting only see it as a pet, only see it as a companion. And so
Mhm.
that idea that, those opposed hunting see it as a pet is repeating here. It's coming up again, but it's coming up in a different way than we normally have read it, right? It's saying conflating hunting and pet ownership. The author does not have to use the same words to express the same idea. They could use different words and different sentence structures to represent the same idea. And that's what we need to look for. And we found that here.
Yes. Yeah, I love when paragraphs tie back into each other. Let's take a look at our fourth paragraph and we'll see if we continue to echo that same idea. Because it sounds like you said, this, by nature of repeating it, this is going to be our main idea. So, paragraph 4 begins, it says, in response to them, those who support hunting argue that foxes do not feel fear as do humans. So now, our author has been very much like, here's the perspective of people who think it's cruel, right? This is the other perspective. So now we're saying if you support hunting, it's because the fear is not the same as human fear, right? The fear that these hunted foxes feel is not what we think it is, right?
Great.
So we'll probably get more into that perspective.
Yep, definitely. It's definitely an idea, right? We don't know. We have no idea if foxes do or do not feel fear as as humans would, right? There's no way we would ever be able to measure that. We can use experiments and evidence to some extent and support that in one way or another, but we don't know. And so that's why this is definitely an opinion. And again, there's no right or wrong answer, right? Is hunting good or is it bad? People have different points of views, and that's what the author is trying to suggest is one side may not like it because they think it's cruel. It's because it makes the animal suffer, right? And the author did point out at the end it's because maybe they don't realize that there is a distinction between animals hunting animals and pet and companionship. But in this case, the author is now expanding on how maybe, hunting an animal is okay potentially, right? At least from their perspective, because they're not feeling the same fear. They're not going through the same suffering, right? Okay.
Mhm. Yeah. And in this case, we're going to follow with a perspective as well. So, for example, the British Field Sports Society states, and quote, even when it does not realize that it is being followed, a fox will behave with great calm, almost to the point of indifference. So again, we're bringing in a direct quote from some organization that must support the idea. So British Field Sports Society must support hunting, right? And it's saying the fox doesn't even realize or care that it's being followed. It's not that it's cruel and they're suffering because they're being hunted or chased, right? They don't even care. They're calm, right? They're completely indifferent to it. So again, totally different perspective from what we heard with the League Against Cruel Sports.
This is so confusing to students because they're reading this passage and they're thinking, wait a second, what does the author think? What's going on? And if you're panicking over that, you're gonna miss it. You're gonna lose sense of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Focus on the paragraph in front of you. Try to just understand what the paragraph in front of you is saying. And then when you look back, you're gonna be able to notice the structure. Where did the author start? Where is it going? And you'll start noticing a repeating idea, right? And so great. Yeah, love that.
Love that. Yeah. And we'll finish the quote with the last sentence here. It says, it is certainly not terrified, end quote. So again, if you didn't get it in the first sentence of the quote, right, you now get for sure, it is certainly not terrified. So the hunted animal is not terrified. Again, it's refuting the paragraph that came before, the alternate perspective that hunting is cruel.
Cool.
All right. So it continues. It says, some of my informants say that they have witnessed a fox while being chased by hounds attack chickens. So it's interesting to me that the author is saying my informants. I don't know about you, Jack, but I hear this and I'm like, what is the author? What do you mean your informants, right? Like, what do you
Yeah,
do
he
for
operates.
work, author?
Yeah.
Super interesting, but it seems like we're going to set up a situation to illustrate this point of the fox isn't scared. I don't know. It's attacking chickens. So
Yeah.
maybe you wouldn't do that if you're traumatized. I don't know.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I mean this is sort of an example because it's saying like, okay, well, I've seen it or I've heard that, they've a fox can be chased but still go and attack chickens, meaning what? Meaning that they don't even realize they're being followed. They're still calm. They're just doing their own thing, right? Again, all to support this idea that foxes, at least, not maybe not every animal, but foxes at least don't have the same fear as humans do.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it says for them, the empathy towards Fox's terror is one of naive imagination. So that's a pretty strong word choice, right? If you think it's the fox is terrified, and that word terror is in quotes, if you think that that fox is terrified, you are naive and you're imagining things. Right?
Right.
So that's a pretty direct statement. You are not right if you have that perspective.
Now, is this the author's point or is this someone else's point that the
So
author's
so it says for them, right?
got it.
And probably the most recent subject was the informants, right? But it sounds like maybe they're even saying just for the people that support hunting, could be.
Right, right. So this is the hard part about cars is like, what is the author's point? What is the author's trying to say? And you see for them, and you're like, wait a second, is that the author's point? I don't know. And the way you find the author's point is by understanding again the structure and just keep reading and figure out, okay, what keeps repeating? What does the author keep pointing out? I think the last sentence of the third paragraph kind of made it clear what the author is trying to suggest, but we don't know exactly yet. I'm hoping that the next couple sentences or the next paragraph cleared it up.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so let's finish up paragraph 4 here. It says, moreover, even if they admit that being chased causes significant stress for the fox, they argue that foxes confront many dangers in the wild, and a hunt is only one of these dangers for which they have to deal. So again, they're using this they, which again presumably means the people who support hunting, but they're saying even if you think the fox is scared or terrified, right? This is normal for the fox, right?
Right.
Nature is cruel, right? It's normal. It's nothing extra cruel for us to do it.
Right. Yeah. And so the authors basically, well, at least the people who are suggesting this, they're suggesting that, okay, yeah, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe it does feel fear, but that's normal. Right. And so
Mhm.
they're trying to squash any sort of argument around fear, right? Any sort of
Mhm.
argument around suffering, right? By saying, okay, well, first of all, they don't suffer. They don't even know what's going on. But even if they did suffer, that's part of their life. So get over it. Yeah.
Yes.
Suggest that
Yes.
those people think. Okay, great.
Yeah, that's a perfect wrap up for for paragraph 4, right? It's that posing argument.
Great.
Let's see. We have one more paragraph. Let's see how the author kind of clinches this and if we get any more insight. So it says, in contrast, in one of my informants, who is against fox hunting, says that though wild animals have dangers in the wild and nature is cruel, human beings as an intelligent species should be more thoughtful. Jack, you're totally right. This author is going back and forth and back and forth. I feel like for most students, this is giving them whiplash, right?
Yes.
Like you just told me, you just made this whole point by, the people who support hunting that it's not cruel, but now you're saying a different informant, which again, I'm wondering what you do for work, author, actually says that even though nature's cruel, we should be better as an intelligent species. We're going
Right.
back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again,
And that's the hard part about this, right? We don't we can't assume like, do you remember how I said in the beginning, like we have to be careful. We can't put words into the author's mouth. We can't
mhm.
assume we know what the society expects and expect the author to go with that. We don't know anything about what this author thinks other than what they presented to us. And so far, they've presented ideas from both sides, right? So far. But as I'm reading it, you'll start noticing subtle opinions that the author will make And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the author's opinion. I'm also looking for other people's opinions because why would the author bring them up? Obviously, the author would want to bring them up for a reason, right? Either to show you there is a debate or to kind of side with one of those debates, right? Those sides of the debate. So overall, what I expect you to realize is that Carr's passages always have a competing theme. Don't be annoyed by it. Read
Mhm.
for the author's opinion. Look for ideas that the author keeps repeating. So far, there's only been one idea that seems to have repeated from one paragraph to the next, which is that humans don't look at animals as prey. They don't hunt animals often, right? They look at them more as pets. That has came up twice. It was very subtle in the last sentence of the third paragraph, but that gave me the idea that, okay, maybe that's what the author is leaning towards. Because arguments that repeat are very important arguments. We call those the main idea, the main arguments. Okay,
Mhm.
let's keep going.
Yeah. And it seems like even this is kind of riding that line. So the next sentence we see says the same logic is expressed in a letter sent to the BBC by Joan Hoggard of Staffordshire. And it's a direct quote. Human beings are uniquely capable of showing compassion to other animals in our power, and we therefore have a moral duty to treat them humanely or to deal with them humanely. End quote. So again, continuing this idea, as humans, we should be better,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. More thoughtful, right? And this is the author's presenting a person that probably have some sort of authority, some sort of say in this, right? That is important. And so we need to keep track of whose opinion, who supports what opinion, right? In this case, Hoggard, um, recommends or believes that humans should be more thoughtful, right? Okay.
Hmm. Yeah, and these anti-hunting opinions convey an image of animals under the control or protection of human power as if they were our companions. We're coming full circle again, right? The people who have anti-hunting opinions see animals as pets. I feel like we've seen this before, Jack. What do you think?
Yeah, and see, notice this is the author now saying this, not some informant, not some group of people, not some sort of authority figure like Joan Hoggard or whatever that person's name is. This is now the author. The author is bringing up their point of view. And if you were panicking and you were like worried about what's going on, you might miss it. It's so subtle, it's so quick, right? And so I caught it in the last sentence of the third paragraph, but even if you didn't catch that idea repeat in the last sentence of the third paragraph, you would notice it here. So don't, again,
Mhm.
when the MCAT cares about something, they will make it known. They will bring it up many times, right?
Mhm.
Enough times for you to catch it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Which is why we don't reread, right?
Yeah.
We've got one last sentence. It says, in defense, the pro hunting lobby emphasizes the image of the fox as a pest to one or to which one need not show compassion as one would to pests. So I almost kind of wish the author just ended it with the previous sentence, right? Because
Yeah.
now they're flipping back to the pro hunting. But again, the author sees a distinction between hunted animals and pets, right? And it's the author is acknowledging that most people don't, right? Now they're showing the pro hunting, right? This is a pest. This is something that it's okay to hunt. It's not a pet, right? It still continues that idea, but it kind of muddies the water a little bit from our
Yeah.
clear understanding of the author's opinion.
Wouldn't it be awesome if they just said, I believe, and
Yeah.
sometimes they would, I believe that, they're just thinking of it as a pet, and that's why they're,
Mhm.
anti-hunting, right?
Yeah.
But
Or the main idea is this.
yeah,
That would be lovely.
I still would miss questions because the questions are going to be still very brutal, right? So,
Yeah.
but still, the point here is read carefully, right? Like
Mhm.
be careful and don't worry if you don't understand something immediately and don't suggest that you know what's going on because it's so easy to think, oh, anti-hunting. I don't, everyone hates hunting and you should,
Mhm.
we don't like guns and well, we don't know anything about what the author is saying here. We can't assume that the author is saying what, believes some kind of like typical idea that everyone else believes, right? We don't know. And it's clear here that the author hasn't really gave us their point, their perspective on hunting specifically, but the
Mhm.
author has made it clear that if you oppose hunting, it's probably because you see animals as pets. Right?
Mhm.
Like that's the idea. It's like, oh, people who oppose hunting, if you oppose it, it's because you see it as a pet. Now, another author may make a whole another passage about why we oppose hunting. It might be because, we don't, I don't know, maybe because they're like humans. Yeah, we oppose hunting
Mhm.
because animals are like humans, not pets, right? Or
Mhm.
some other argument, some other suggestion. But the author is very specific here. It became very, very it became something I can hold, I can understand. And I'm going to use that idea to guide the question. So I'm excited to see how students perform on the questions. If you are curious about how to approach questions, if you're curious about how to we call map this passage more precisely with strategy, check out our free cars sessions every week, right? We have those on our website, jackwestin.com. Join a free cars session, and we'll go into a passage and we'll show you even more specific strategies that you can use. But I'm hoping that this helps students understand how to read properly. And of course, we're going to continue doing this. Like, this was really fun.
Yeah, I know. It was super fun. It was a good passage to start with as well. So, to all of our listeners out there, if you enjoyed what you saw here today, definitely come see us in our free sessions, but also tune in again for our next special CARS episode, right? Our CARS reading skill workshops. We're planning to put these out pretty regularly. So, if you like what you saw, come back, check it out next time. Until then, happy studying. Thank you for listening, and have a great rest of your week or weekend or month or whenever you are listening to this in the future.